Hi George.
Hi Martin.
It's a pleasure for me to sit here with you, George Monbiot, reporter of The Guardian and also an author. And you just came out with this book, Regenesis, Feeding the World Without Devouring the Planet. And it's a great read, I can highly recommend it to anyone. On commercials on TV in Sweden, and I imagine most other countries, you can see beautiful green pastures and peaceful cows grazing in the sun. But you describe something totally different about the environmental consequences of today's animal farming. Can you say shortly, what is the impact of factory farms for that environment?
The image of livestock farming created by the industry and by advertising is highly deceptive. You know, they like to show these happy animals munching away in the fields, unmolested by anything. And even the pasture-fed animals, the ones out in the fields, you know, their lives end in the slaughterhouse. You know, their lives end with meat processing, meat packing plants, which are brutal and horrible places. Most of them are fed on supplementary feed. They don't just eat grass, but when they do eat grass, that's an environmental disaster in its own right, because it requires a huge amount of land to be occupied, land which could otherwise be forested, harbour wetlands, other absolutely essential habitats. There's an enormous ecological opportunity cost involved and an enormous carbon opportunity cost, all the things you could be doing better with that land if you weren't using it for livestock. But that also covers up one of society's greatest and darkest secrets, which is intensive livestock farming, the huge steel factories in which tens of thousands of animals are packed, and we don't want to know about it. We pretend it's not happening, and yet almost all the livestock products we eat come from those factories.
I came into this issue being an animal rights activist actually, but now the climate has become more and more important for me, as for many, and also movements like the movement I belong to, the same movement. How do you see those things go together? How do they, the caring for animals and wanting to save the climate through changes in our farming?
I think the two things go together very well, and I think it's time we had a much stronger convergence between the animal rights and the environmental movements. It is beginning to happen. In my country, we've got Animal Rebellion, which has now become quite a powerful force, and they've become very aware of the environmental aspects. I think some environmentalists need to become more aware of the animal rights aspects. But you know, not only is livestock farming arguably the most damaging of any industrial sector, it's the most damaging thing we are doing to the planet, but it also means we are killing 75 billion animals a year to sate our appetites. We don't need to eat them, but just for the sake of taste, 75 billion, I mean, it's beyond comprehension, that number, and the suffering involved in that. So I don't see any contradiction in pursuing both those aims, to pursuing an animal rights agenda and an environmental agenda. They are one and the same.
Yeah, and when I became vegan about 15 years ago, there was quite slim pickings when it came to taste and texture, but today it's a completely different ballgame.
It has got a lot better. I mean, I still find, you know, it helps me a lot that I like cooking. I enjoy cooking. I've got a reasonable kitchen. I've got the kit that I need to cook with. If you don't enjoy cooking, or you haven't got time, or you haven't got a kitchen, as increasing numbers don't, it is more difficult to be a vegan. You know, it's much easier to throw some meat-based thing in the frying pan or the microwave, you know, but that is getting easier and easier. And what's crucial now is to bring down the price of some of the new kinds of vegan foods and to make them better and to make them less processed. There's a lot of work to be done there. Some people are doing good work in there. There's some very poor quality vegan food around, and that can give the rest of vegan food a bad reputation. So, you know, it's in our interest to get quality higher and price lower, and that can be done.
Sure. I saw the biggest newspaper here in the city of Uppsala, where we are right now. Uppsala Nya Tider is the name of the newspaper. They wrote 5 days ago about your book and about you coming here. Did you notice? No. And from the opinion piece of the paper itself, they say, it is said that your perspective disregards the fact that we can't eat what the grazing animals can eat, and that the quality of food from the animals is very high. Your response?
Well, this old chestnut, I hear this so often. Oh, we can't do anything else with this land. Yes, you can. You can rewild the land. You can bring back rich ecosystems. And in fact, if we don't bring back rich ecosystems on a very large scale, we will not get through this century, because rewilding the planet is probably our last option now.
Why is that so important?
Well, so Earth systems, our life support systems, they depend to a very large extent on wild ecosystems, which maintain a balance in the atmosphere, balance in the oceans, all the things which contribute to a stable and habitable planet. We have so eroded those wild ecosystems that many no longer function, and we are in the midst of a 6th great extinction. We're seeing very large loss of species. It's a catastrophe, both for anyone who loves wildlife, but for anyone who values the continuation of human life. You know, they're driving us towards a spiral of destruction. And so what we need to do is to stop the 6th great extinction and draw down a lot of the carbon dioxide we've already released into the atmosphere, because we've now left it too late merely to decarbonize our economies. You know, even if we cut out all further greenhouse gas emissions, we would almost certainly get past 1.5 degrees of heating, probably past 2 degrees of heating. We also need to be drawing down carbon dioxide we've already produced.
Right, yeah.
And the best and most benign way of doing both those things is mass ecological restoration. It's cheap, it's easy, it solves 2 problems at the same time, the ecological crisis and the climate crisis. And it's now our last best hope. There's not many other things. And if we can stop farming livestock, then we have a huge amount of land which can be used for rewilding.
Right. And in the end of your book, you say that one of the greatest threats to life on Earth is poetry. That's not something you hear every day. And you write about this pastoral myth, like a few animals grazing with a caring guardian, this idea of this paradise picture, if you will. Is that maybe, you said it's an idea that keeps us from seeing reality, and that is a great obstacle to change.
Yeah.
And the Swedish farm lobby, as I'm sure many lobbies, they use this, of course, this story, perpetrate it endlessly. In Sweden, they talk a lot about the importance of open fields, öppna landskap. All the time you hear this, open fields. And because it's so important for biodiversity. We even have one of the most popular songs in Swedish is called Open Fields, öppna landskap. Maybe the most popular song.
Yeah.
Your reflections on that?
So we're constantly told that we need to be farming the cattle and the sheep to maintain biodiversity. What they're talking about is the diversity of very, very few species, diversity of flowers, maybe, diversity of butterflies. But the great majority of species are shut out by animal farming. Large predators are threatened by livestock farming more than anything else. What's wiping out large predators around the world is livestock farming, and that has huge implications for ecosystems as a whole. If you lose your large predators, you lose a huge amount of other species and of the function of ecosystems. You lose your trees when you've got livestock because they eat the little tree seedlings. They're highly nutritious. You lose your wild herbivores, which are often fenced out of where the livestock are. And in fact, one study showed that removing livestock improves the diversity of all guilds, all functional groups of species, except the ones that eat dung. They're the only ones which benefit from having livestock. So, you can have systems where you bring down your livestock to tiny, tiny numbers, just a very few cattle or ponies, say, very, very small numbers, which can help some species. They can create a diversity of habitats, a mosaic of habitats. And that's okay, from the ecological point of view, that's fine, but that's not a production system. It's a totally different thing. And those two things have been deliberately confused by the meat industry to say that this thing, which involves so few animals that if that was the only way of producing meat, only millionaires would eat it, with this thing, which has loads of animals and is trying to bring them in at market price, they are completely different systems. But the two things have been confused by the industry so that we think this highly destructive system is the same as this system, which can exist alongside quite a lot of wildlife.
Yeah. So how is it that we can keep telling us this story? Of course, the lobby tries to tell it again and again, but most people have seen animal farms, maybe on the news. Some animal rights group have been inside and documenting, but still, most of us will keep telling us, it's a great way of keeping animals and growing our food and so on.
We deliberately shield the truth from ourselves. I mean, the great majority of our animal products come from factory farms. And we do not want to know this. We don't want to know where our food comes from. So there's this classic survey in the United States where 95% of people eat meat, right? 47% want to ban slaughterhouses.
I saw that a couple of years. I couldn't believe it.
Where do they think meat comes from? And people really, they would like to believe that meat just materializes. It just appears in the packet. Oh yeah, look, this steak just appears. I wonder where that came from. That's funny. These chicken nuggets, Why do they call it chicken? I don't get that. We want to forget, because if we were to tune into this, the horror would be overwhelming. I mean, if we treated our cats and dogs in the same way as we treat pigs, we would be sent to prison. And yet we've normalized this horrendous treatment of pigs. I mean, my introduction to all this was when I was a teenager. I worked in an intensive pig farm, and it was so shocking to me because it was so different to what the image of farming that I had in my head was. I was attracted to farming because I thought it was like the storybook image of farming. So I ended up working in this intensive pig farm, and it was like, this isn't what they told me it was about. And why is this legal?
Yeah, good questions. I appreciate you talk about alternatives to this farming ways that we have today. They are so destructive, more ecological, and farming without plowing and so on. And in the end of the book, you talk about how you can produce food from bacteria in large metal containers. And I think I said this to my community mates yesterday, and what? They had never heard of it. I read a little bit about it before I read your book. But for most of us, it seems like science fiction. And I think also some might be skeptical because it might remind them of like what the fossil industry says about we can solve the climate crisis because we have this fancy new technology called carbon capture and storage, and we're researching on it, and while they're doing that, while they're talking about that, they just keep on with business as usual. Do you understand why people might think?
No, I totally understand that. But so first thing to say is that technology alone is not going to solve anything. But then politics alone is not going to solve anything, and economics alone is not going to solve anything, and social change alone is not going to solve anything. We need to bring all these things together. We need to do all of it. And the big political challenge is not so much the new technologies we develop, but the old technologies we retire, leaving fossil fuels in the ground, stopping animal farming. But in order to do that, we do need the new technologies which replace the old ones. So we need wind power, we need solar power, but we also need new ways of producing animal-like foods that people are prepared to eat. Because while you and I have gone vegan, the vast majority of the world's people have no intention of doing so. And in fact, meat eating is rising and rising. So until we find a technological alternative to meat eating, which is going to be very much like animal products, almost impossible to tell the difference, and ideally cheaper, because that's where we're really going to win on this, and healthier. Until we do that, we can say, please stop eating meat, please stop eating dairy, please stop eating eggs, and people are not going to listen to us. But if we say, here's something that you will not tell the difference and it's half the price, it speaks for itself then, and you don't need so much persuasion.
Right.
And so, it's not an answer in and of itself, but it's an essential part of the answer. It's a necessary but not sufficient condition for change.
But this is not yet out to buy in the grocery stores.
Not in Europe. In the US, there are precision fermentation products. And actually, we've got some in here. If any of your listeners still eat cheese, or indeed if you eat vegan cheese for that matter, you are eating a precision fermentation product, which is the chymosin, which is the substitute for rennet we once got out of a calf's stomach, which makes the cheese congeal.
And how about the big meat and dairy companies? Are they also working on precision fermentation?
Some of them are working on meat alternatives because they want to capture the whole market. And you can bet your life they're making pretty low grade ones because they don't want them to be better than meat. Whereas what we need to see is really quality ones, which are also cheap because you've got potential digital style cost curves. A real ski slope of cost curve.
Have we seen that already, or is it coming?
No. Well, already it's come down, but we're still at that top bit, where you're just beginning to reach the slope, and then when you scale up and you go into full commercialization, it'll be quite similar to digital. Whereas the animal farming is already at the bottom of the cost curve. And this is why they do such cruel things to animals to try and extract a little bit more efficiency. Or let's use bovine growth hormones. Let's inject pigs with ractopamine, in order to just squeeze a bit more profit out of this system, because they've hit rock bottom. They can't push those animals any harder, without killing them. And they do kill large numbers of them, accidentally, quite aside from the ones they slaughter.
So the same paper I mentioned, Uppsala Nya Tider, in the same article, they wrote, given that George Monbiot is fiercely critical of the capitalistic market economy, it's strange that he promotes a system where a few capitalistic major industries will replace the billion, most of them small farmers and pastoralists, who works with the world's farming.
Yeah, well, they always trot out the same old things, and it doesn't matter how many times you say, no, that's not the case. I've made, in much of the book, it's about how we destroy capitalist monopoly, how we have got to have weak intellectual property rights, strong antitrust laws, break up the big businesses which already dominate the food chain. 4 corporations control 90% of global grain trade, for example, and it's very dangerous. It's extreme concentration. So, what I want to see happen, and these are political choices, is a distributed production system with a microbial brewery in every town, producing protein-rich foods tailored to local markets, and that's an entirely plausible system. In fact, it's far more likely that we can feed people with local food through precision fermentation than we can through farming, because very large parts of the planet do not have enough fertile land and water to feed the people living in their cities. There was a study done, I think in Nature Food, showing that the minimum average distance over which people can be fed with grain is 2,200 kilometres. And that's because we live in big cities with small agricultural hinterlands, so we have to draw that food from a long, long way away. But if you want to eat local food, you can't do it. You can't feed everyone local food mathematically, because it's just, the land isn't there. But you can do it if you're not using agriculture, but you're producing your protein-rich foods in breweries instead. Now, you still need to produce grain and vegetables. Grain trade will always be long distance to some extent, but the fruit and vegetables can be grown locally in a lot of countries, and should be. They lend themselves very well to local production. So you can have your protein-rich foods and your fruit and vegetables grown locally, but you'll still be trading grain long distance.
I'm often surprised that like papers and also lobby organizations come with write out lies. I mean, this is a lie. I've read your book. There's nothing about this, and in your interviews and so on. And it is a bit strange.
Well, I mean, when they misrepresent you, you know you're winning.
Yeah.
You know, because if they can't argue against what you're actually saying, they have to misrepresent you.
That's true. So I've been active in this plant-based treaty, this campaign.
Yeah.
You know about it?
I do. It's great. I'm really pleased to see it. I've signed the petition. Yeah.
Okay, great. And of course, it strikes me that many of the goals are exactly the same that you talk about. Maybe not so much about the new technology, but the need, of course, to make the transition to a plant-based diet. So talking about what can we do as citizens, as activists to make this happen? Of course, you have a great skill of writing a book, but what else can we do?
Sure. So there's a whole series of things we need to do, and obviously the first thing that anyone should do if you want to reduce your individual impact on the planet, it's the most important thing is to switch to a plant-based diet. That and flying, you know, that number one, plant-based diet, number two, flying. Those are the two major individual actions you can take. Most of the rest of what we need to do is collective. We need to work together and form movements which are big enough to create social tipping points. And it's been done many times before by many other movements. If you think, for instance, of the marriage equality campaign, you know, which was, you know, gay rights activists very successfully widened and widened the circle of social acceptance of the idea until they reached a tipping point, and suddenly everyone just fell into line with it. You know, it was a tough fight, but once they got there, it happened very quickly. And we can do something very similar, but we need to make an offer to people. We need to show that there is something positive, and that's where this whole new cuisine that will be opened up by precision fermentation comes in, because you can say, actually, you know, we can all have much more accessible, cheaper, good food without trashing the planet. We can feed the world without devouring the planet.
Yes. That's excellent, George. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's a pleasure to have you here in Sweden, and I applaud you trying to spread this very important message.
Thank you so much for all your work.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
thank you.
Thanks, Martin.